The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in late November while I was sitting in my car outside a Tim Hortons in Kelowna, hands wrapped around a coffee that had already gone cold. It was my stepmother. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Your father and I have decided to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Just the two of us and your brother. We hope you understand." I stared through the windshield at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan. A kid was chasing a cart across the pavement. The world just kept moving like nothing had happened. I said, "Okay." That was it. One word. She hung up. I sat there for a long time. Then I opened my banking app, transferred every dollar from my personal savings into my checking account, and started making calls. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed insolvency trustee, which means I spend my days helping people untangle financial disasters, trace hidden assets, and figure out exactly where the money went and who took it. I have a head for numbers, the way some people have a head for faces. I don't forget figures. I don't miss patterns. And for a very long time, I had been watching the pattern in my own family and pretending I didn't see it. That Wednesday afternoon, I stopped pretending. My father had bought a small lakeside cottage property in the Okanagan 3 years earlier, right before he married her. He talked about it for months beforehand, called me every Sunday to describe the lot, the view, the listing price. He said it was going to be our family place, a legacy property. He said he wanted me involved in the purchase, wanted my opinion on the offer, wanted me to see it before he signed anything. I drove 4 hours to see it. I spent a weekend there helping him measure rooms and plan renovations. I gave him my professional assessment of the title, flagged a lien from a previous owner that could have cost him $40,000 if it hadn't been caught. He clapped me on the shoulder and said he didn't know what he'd do without me. He signed the papers a week later. My name was not on the title. 6 months after that, he married her. My brother was the best man. I found out about the wedding from a cousin who saw the photos on Facebook. The cottage became her project after that. New deck furniture. A renovation she described to me, the one time she bothered, as modernizing the aesthetic. I paid for the lien clearance work. I never got the money back. It became a gift, the way things always became gifts in my family. The moment I stopped holding my hand out for it. I had a spreadsheet. I know how that sounds. But I'm an insolvency trustee. Spreadsheets are how I think. I had a document I'd named Property and Personal, and it listed every dollar I had moved in my father's direction over 6 years. The $8,500 I lent him when his renovation business hit a slow stretch in 2019. The $22,000 I transferred to cover the down payment shortfall on the Kelowna property, money he told me would come back once he refinanced, money that never came back. The $30,000 I put on my own credit card for a furnace repair on his previous house after he called me crying, saying he didn't have the cash and didn't want to go to a payday lender. There was a line for every single one. Dates, amounts, what I was told the money was for, what it actually seemed to go toward. The total was just over $61,000 across 6 years. My brother's total, in the column beside it, was 0. He had never been asked. He had never been called at 11 at night. He had never been handed a sob story and a bank transfer form. He was just loved, freely, consistently, without conditions or invoices. I closed the laptop the morning after the call. The ledger was clear. I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I wasn't a daughter. I was a financial instrument. And I had just been told, politely, that I was no longer required at Thanksgiving dinner. Fine. I had other plans. The property I'd been watching was a 6-acre parcel on the east side of Okanagan Lake, about 20 minutes from the city. It had a small cedar cabin, a detached workshop, a well, and a private road access. It had been sitting on the market for 4 months because the seller had priced it emotionally. He built the cabin himself 30 years ago and couldn't accept what the land was actually worth. I had been watching the price drops. I had run the numbers 4 times. I knew the moment he reduced it one more time, it would be the best deal within 200 kilometers. He reduced it the Tuesday before the call. The Wednesday after the call, I put in a full-price offer, with a 7-day close and a personal letter that said I plan to live there, not flip it. He accepted within 3 hours. I transferred $287,000 from the line of credit I had been building, deliberately and quietly, for 2 years. Not my emergency fund, not my retirement account. A separate instrument I had set up specifically so that if I ever needed to move fast, I could move without asking anyone for anything. I drove out to the property that Friday evening. The cabin was cold and smelled like pine and old wood smoke. The lake was steel gray through the trees. I stood on the dock in my coat and looked at the water and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, like something was finally mine. I didn't call my father to tell him. I didn't text my brother. I drove back to the cabin, built a fire in the wood stove, and sat on the floor with my back against the couch while the heat slowly filled the room. My phone buzzed twice. I didn't look at it. The next 6 weeks were quiet. I worked remotely from the cabin during the week and drove back to my apartment in the city on weekends. I set up cameras, 4 of them, covering the driveway, the front porch, and both sides of the cabin. I changed the lock on the front door to a commercial-grade deadbolt. I pulled the property title records and cross-referenced them with the original listing history just to be thorough, because I am always thorough. I knew they would come eventually. Men like my father don't hear no and file it away. They hear no and start working on a new angle. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly it would happen or who he would bring with him. It was a Saturday afternoon in early December. Gray sky. First real snow of the season. I was at my kitchen table with my laptop open, reviewing a corporate restructuring file for a client, when the motion sensor on the driveway camera sent a notification to my phone. I picked it up without getting up. A white SUV was pulling slowly down my private road. I recognized my father's driving before I recognized the vehicle. That particular way he takes turns, like he owns the road and is doing everyone else a favor by sharing it. He parked in front of the cabin, got out, looked around the property with the expression he always wore when he was calculating something, not admiring it. My brother got out of the passenger side. He was wearing a jacket I'd never seen. Nice, expensive looking, new. He kicked the snow off the step like he'd been here before. The third person was a woman I didn't know. She was carrying a folder. I watched them on my phone screen. My father walked up to the front door. He didn't knock. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a key. The old key, the one he had cut without telling me when I briefly used his address for mail 2 years ago. The key I had forgotten he had. He slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again. Jiggled the handle. Looked at the lock like it had made a personal decision to offend him. Then he stepped back and said something to my brother. My brother laughed. They walked to the back of the SUV together. My father came back with a pry bar from his truck bed. Old red-handled, the one he kept for job sites. I zoomed in on the camera feed. He didn't look angry. He looked matter-of-fact. He looked like a man who had decided a door that wouldn't open was simply a practical problem to be solved. That was the moment I understood something I had been circling for years without being able to name it. He didn't believe he was doing anything wrong. He wasn't here to steal from me. In his mind, he was here to correct an error. The error being that I had put a lock on something he considered his by extension. The error being that I had a door he couldn't open, and doors were not supposed to close to him. It wasn't entitlement exactly. It was something deeper and quieter and more dangerous than entitlement. It was erasure. He had simply never built a mental model of me as a separate person, with separate property and separate rights. I was an extension. Extensions don't get to have doors. He worked the pry bar into the door frame. The commercial deadbolt held longer than I expected. I could hear the wood groan through the exterior mic. My brother stood a few feet back, hands in his pockets, watching. The woman with the folder had retreated to the front of the SUV and was looking at her phone. With a sound like a gunshot, the door gave. He walked into my cabin. I was sitting at the kitchen table, 30 feet away. I didn't move. I watched the camera feed switch from exterior to interior. My father walked into the main room and looked around the way you look at a space you're already mentally rearranging. My brother followed him in. He walked over to the wood stove, tapped it with his knuckle, and said something I couldn't hear. Then he looked at the shelving unit I'd built along the east wall. I'd spent an entire weekend on it, and pointed at it. I heard my father say, clearly, "We can stage it or clear it. Doesn't matter. Listing goes up Monday." My brother picked up the ceramic mug my grandmother had given me before she passed, the last thing I had of hers. He turned it over in his hands and set it down on the wrong shelf, carelessly, on the edge. I opened the security app on my phone. There was a red button in the top right corner. It was not connected to a monitoring service in the call center. I had set it up 6 weeks earlier with direct relay to the RCMP detachment in Kelowna. In consultation with a duty officer I had called and spoken to, honestly, I told him I owned property I believed was at risk, told him I had reason to think an unauthorized entry was possible, asked whether there was a protocol for that kind of situation. He told me there was. He walked me through it. I also called my best friend. She is a real property lawyer, licensed in British Columbia. She had been waiting. I pressed the button. There were no sirens, no lights from inside. What happened instead was that the floodlights I had mounted along the driveway and the roofline clicked on simultaneously, turning the gray December afternoon into something close to noon. My father stumbled back from the window. My brother spun around. 2 RCMP cruisers came up my private road. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady and deliberate the way authority moves when it isn't in a hurry because it doesn't need to be. They blocked the white SUV. 2 officers got out. Behind them, my best friend's car pulled up. She had been parked at a pull-off on the main road for 40 minutes. She got out carrying a document binder, heels crunching in the snow, absolutely calm. My father recovered fast. He walked out to the porch and smiled at the officers like a man who had been expecting them and was glad they'd arrived. He said there was a family dispute. He said there was a question of property management, and his daughter had been making decisions outside her authority. He gestured at the broken door frame with a kind of regretful shrug, like something unfortunate had happened that he was also a victim of. The lead officer looked at the splintered frame. She looked at the pry bar leaning against the railing. "Sir," she said, "that's not a property dispute. That's a break and enter." My father started explaining about family assets and verbal agreements and the nature of parental investment in a child's financial life. He used the word oversight. He used it twice. I walked out through the broken door. The look on his face when he saw me, not scared, not guilty, just momentarily recalibrating, told me everything I'd ever needed to know. "I live here," I said. "This is my property. I have owned it for 6 weeks. My name is the only name on the title, and I have the transfer documents to prove it." He told the officers I had used money from a family account, that the funds were technically his, that I had moved them without authorization. He said this with the confidence of someone who had said it so many times in private that it had become his truth. My friend opened the binder. She pulled out a single page and handed it to the officer without a word. It was a notarized affidavit. It documented the $61,000 I had transferred to my father over 6 years, dates and amounts and stated purposes, cross-referenced against bank records. It documented that I had received 0 written acknowledgement of any of it as a loan and 0 repayment. It documented, in a legal opinion attached as an appendix, that there was no claim on my personal line of credit, no shared account involved in the property purchase, and no legal instrument giving my father or anyone else standing to list, manage, or access this property. It also contained a screenshot of the camera footage, time-stamped, clearly showing my father inserting a key, failing to gain entry, retrieving a pry bar, and forcing the door. The officer read it. She handed it back. She told my father he was being investigated for breaking and entering under Section 348 of the Criminal Code, mischief to property and attempted fraud. She told the woman with the folder that if she filed a listing for this property, she would be participating in a fraudulent transaction, and advised her in plain language to leave. The woman left immediately. I watched her drive back up the road, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My father tried one more move. He told the officer I had stolen the pry bar from his truck, that it was his property, and I had no right to it. He was going to file a report. "Go ahead," I said. I looked at the officer and then back at him. The tool is visible on exterior camera footage entering the property in his hand. I'd be careful about what reports you file right now. The officer looked at him levelly. "Filing a false report is a separate offense," she said. He didn't say anything after that. My brother had not spoken a single word during any of this. He stood by the SUV with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching me the way you watch someone you suddenly realize you don't actually know. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked away first. They were given a court date. The officers took my father's contact information and told him he would hear from the Crown. They told my brother the same. There would be a full investigation into the break and enter and the attempted fraudulent listing. As the cruisers pulled back up the road, my friend walked over to me and handed me a thermos of tea she had apparently been carrying in her bag the whole time. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. We went inside and I lit the wood stove. She pulled 2 folding chairs up to the fire and we sat there while the snow came down outside and the cabin filled up with warmth. I held the ceramic mug, my grandmother's mug, still on the edge of the shelf where my brother had left it, and I moved it back to where it belonged. My phone started buzzing about 2 hours later. My father, then my brother, then a number I didn't recognize, which I suspected was a lawyer he'd found at short notice. I blocked all 3. Then I picked up the phone and called my cousin, the one who had tipped me off about the wedding photos years ago, the one who had always been quietly, steadily in my corner without making a big thing of it. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Good. It's about time." We talked for an hour. About our grandmothers, about the family we'd each made outside of the one we were born into, about what it means to stop managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own life. When I hung up, the fire was low and the snow was still coming down and the lake was invisible behind the dark tree line. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I felt settled, the way a building feels when the foundation finally levels out after years of slow shifting. My brother reached out 6 weeks later. Not an apology, not quite. More of a message that started with, "I've been thinking," and contained the phrase, "I didn't realize how it looked." I read it twice and then I put my phone down and went back to the document I was working on. Because I am still an insolvency trustee and there are still people who need help untangling financial disasters that other people made for them. I know what it costs to carry debt that was never yours to begin with. I know what it looks like when someone moves money around and calls it love. I know how to read a ledger. I know how to close one. The property title still has only one name on it, mine,